Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Lost connection there for a second. But what I was saying was that the DEA essentially has left marijuana as a Schedule I substance, essentially deeming it as having no medicinal value, saying that they need to have studies that show the medicinal value before they can reschedule it. That's understandable. The problem is that this catch-22 situation that you may have heard used to describe this is that it's very hard to do the studies to prove that medicinal benefit if it's a Schedule I substance. So what the DEA did yesterday was they said, you know what, we are going to allow more research-grade marijuana to be grown. That's what we're going to do. We're not rescheduling it. We're going to allow more of the marijuana to be grown that is research grade. You may or may not know this, but as things stand now, there's only one place in the country that is federally approved to grow this research grade marijuana. It's actually on the campus of the University of Mississippi in Oxford, and it's this grow field, several acres over there. And the criticism has long been, look, we need more places that are growing this, and we need a wider diversity of places as well. And that may come about as a result of the DEA ruling. They may actually have not only a greater amount, but a greater diversity of marijuana. But the question is, the most important question to researchers that I've been speaking to for several years now, reporting this, is it going to make a difference? Am I going to have access to that increased diversity of marijuana? Because that's the most salient question for them. You know, it'd be kind of like this. Come with me for a second, Ben. It'd be kind of like this. It'd be saying, okay, I'm a shop owner, and I have a product behind these doors that everybody wants. It's a high-demand product, in this case, the medicinal marijuana for research. In response to the demand, I'm going to make more of the marijuana. I'm going to make more and more of it and still put it over there, but leave the doors shut. The doors are still shut. Yes, there's more of the research-grade marijuana behind these doors, but what difference does it make if you can't get through the doors in the first place? And this is a bit of a nuanced point, but I think it's an important point because it's just a very practical thing for researchers who are trying to do this. They got to go through so many hurdles if you're trying to schedule a Schedule I substance. You got to get a license from the DEA. If you're going to do research at this on this substance, you have to have safes, heavy-duty safes on the premises. You have to have security systems. Those can be expensive. Academic institutions can do it more easily, but if you're a small institution, that can be a rate-limiting step. There's also this more cultural notion of, does a university want to approve a study on a Schedule I substance? They worry that there might be fallout, in the press. That's happened before. Dr. Sue Sisley got an approval initially to do the study on PTSD, but then the University of Arizona, which was her home base, basically pulled out. There was some negative press, there was some negative actions from people within the university, and the study got canceled. So you have that as a barrier because it's a Schedule I substance. And then you also have this organization known as NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Up until now, they've been a critical step in approval for any of these studies. And they will still be, obviously very involved in the studies that they're funding. The problem, a little bit, and I've spent a lot of time with the folks at NIDA, including Dr. Nora Volko, who's a very committed neuroscientist, is that the title of their name is National Institute on Drug Abuse. One of their mandates, according to Dr. Abrams, who is at the University of California, San Francisco, he explained it to me like this. He says, one of their mandates is to study abuse. It kind of makes sense. They're the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so while they do approve marijuana studies, the disproportionate amount of marijuana studies that they do approve are designed to look for harm as opposed to look for benefit. So just think about that for a second. They're designed to look for harm as opposed to benefit. And when we did our rough calculation, admittedly non-scientific calculation, over the last 5 years, there have been some 1,500 papers written about medical marijuana, and only 57 of them looking at medical marijuana benefits. So if you're looking at this from a macro level, you think there's a lot of studies out here that show this is a problem, and very few that show that there's a benefit. Many people won't take the one upstream step to say, well, wait a second, who was approving what studies, and how did this sort of picture emerge? Is it an accurate picture, or does it reflect the fact that beneficial studies weren't getting approved in the first place? And that's a big concern, and I don't know, again, if that's going to change under this new DEA ruling. I will also point out that, look, there's a certain amount of there's surprises all along the way with the story of medicinal marijuana. And it's a Schedule 1 substance deemed to have no medicinal benefit, and then the Department of Health and Human Services has a patent on cannabinoids for certain, actually several medicinal uses. So DEA says no medical benefit, HHS has a patent for medical benefit. And even the administrative judge for the DEA once, I'm going to read you this quickly. The administrative judge for the DEA once was asked to render an opinion regarding, let's see if I can find it. Sorry, I can't find this right now. Here it is, right here. So he was asked to render an opinion basically on scheduling marijuana. And this is back in 1988, and the administrative judge is Francis Young, and he said, in strict medical terms, marijuana is far safer than many foods we commonly consume. For example, eating 10 raw potatoes can result in a toxic response. By comparison, it is physically impossible to eat enough marijuana to induce death. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. This is according to the administrative judge with the DEA, with the organization that also says this is a Schedule 1 substance, deeming it having the highest potential for abuse. So it's an interesting, there's hypocrisies, I think, all along the way. Some of them you just kind of understand, and maybe, frankly, you don't always have the energy to call out. Other hypocrisies leave you so dumbfounded that you can't believe no one else has already called it out. But I think with regard to leaving something as a Schedule 1 substance and saying we're not going to move it until we have studies showing it has medical benefit, but then making those medical benefit studies so hard and so cumbersome to actually complete is a hypocrisy, and sometimes you need to speak up. So what do you, let's hear from you.
I will say there's a lot of angry faces scrolling across the screen right now, a lot of people pointing the finger at Big Pharma and wanting to know if you think, or if people think that they are at least in part responsible for the DEA's decision. Why would the DEA make this decision?
People are asking about pharma, and look, this is what this question really speaks to, I think, is the question of motivation. Okay, so here's you have the DEA who's basically saying we're not going to reschedule this, despite the fact that Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, holds a patent on it. You have the DEA saying we're going to still call it a Schedule 1 substance, we're not going to reschedule it, we're still going to say it's one of the most dangerous and has the highest potential for abuse, despite the fact that the President of the United States said that he doesn't think it's any more dangerous than alcohol. And the DEA itself said nearly 20 years ago that it's far safer than many of the foods we consume. So what's the motivation? Why is the DEA continuing to dig in their heels on Schedule 1 status? I don't know. There's all sorts of theories out there, and one of the theories that I think some of you are suggesting is that, look, who has the most to gain or lose from that, and if it's a whole plant that potentially is going to get studied and approved, does pharma not have a dog in that race and therefore not want it to happen? They would rather want to take individual ingredients from this plant, synthesize in the lab, and then sell it. And some scientists will make the argument it's a lot easier to study just a single molecule compound as opposed to this plant that has several hundred compounds. Fair enough. That's a fair enough argument that it is easier to study a single compound, single molecular compound. But it doesn't. I guess it doesn't mean you should stop trying. To basically say it may be hard to do this, and therefore we're going to make it even harder seems like a strange argument. But I don't know. Maybe what do you guys think? What are the motivations you think? Why is the DEA continuing to dig in their heels?
People also want to know a little bit more about the scheduling system. And you talked a bit about this, but Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Marijuana remains a Schedule 1 along with some pretty other hard drugs.
Yeah, there's no question. In fact, I know it, but let me just pull up the thing here so I can read you the exact language. So Schedule 1 controlled substance. This is all under what is known as CSA, the Controlled Substances Act. So Schedule 1 says that they are a drug or other substance of high potential for abuse, and has no accepted medical use and treatment in the United States. I should point out that up until 1942, marijuana was actually on the formulary in the United States. So it was a drug, it was a medication that doctors could go to prescribe up until 1942. So, it's a little bit hard to understand. Some of the other substances that are Schedule 1, heroin is a Schedule 1 substance. LSD is a Schedule 1 substance. Schedule 2, interestingly, cocaine is a Schedule 2 substance. Cocaine is a Schedule 2 substance. And that's also a drug or a substance that has a high potential for abuse, but have currently accepted medical uses in the United States. There is a Schedule 3 substance that is a derivative, it is a synthesized THC drug, Marinol. And that gets back to this idea again that they take a single ingredient here, THC, which may have made it easier to study and to get it scheduled as a Schedule 3, but leaving the whole plant still in this very limbo-like state of saying, hey, we want data, but we're going to make it really hard to get the data.
Yeah, you've done a lot of reporting on this, including 3-hour-long specials on CNN. For people who didn't see all of them, why is the whole plant so important?
Well, the question about why is the whole plant so important, a lot of drug development does revolve around basically taking what we think are the active ingredients out of whatever plant, usually. I mean, most of our drugs do come from plants initially, but taking out the active ingredients, identifying them, and then synthesizing them and creating medications that way. With marijuana and other substances as well, to be fair, what you seem to find is that it doesn't work as well as the whole plant. And that's anecdotal, but you hear that a lot from labs and people all over the world. It just doesn't work as well to synthesize a single ingredient. And a guy named Dr. Raf Meshulam, who's in Israel, as somebody I spent a fair amount of time with, he was the first to isolate THC, identify it, and then even start to synthesize it. He sort of came to this conclusion about something known as the entourage effect. And what he basically says is the reason you need the whole plant is because while the active ingredients are probably the right ones, THC and CBD, that the other ingredients within the plant can help open a door within the body so that it can be metabolized in a better way, or it actually acts in some more synergistic way. We don't know what all those other things do exactly, but his conclusion on entourage effect is that the whole plant is going to be the best way, the most efficient way to actually introduce some of these active substances into the body. And again, that's what needs to be studied, and that should be allowed to be studied.
So again, over the past couple of years, you've seen a lot of really incredible stories when it comes to marijuana as medicine that worked for people where nothing else worked. Talk a little bit about that. Charlotte Figge, I remember from the first weed special, and it's not like they went to this first. This was the last resort, and it worked.
Yeah, there's no question, and I also want to be fair on another point, and that is that when I used to look at the data, because I've done a lot of reporting on this for years now. When I used to look at the data around medicinal marijuana, one of the things I do is I like to look at the data. I will look at it macro, and then I'll look at it micro. So macro, I'll say, okay, let's look at how many papers have been published on this in the last whatever number of years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and specifically at another topic within that area. And when I would look at it, I would see that most of the literature basically was describing the harms of medicinal marijuana and not the benefits. And so it didn't look particularly compelling to me when I would review this sort of from a medical journalist standpoint. But again, as I was making the point earlier, even I didn't really look one step upstream further. Say, well, God, there's only a few percentage of the studies actually showing any benefit. And it wasn't so much that only a few percent of the studies were showing any benefit. It was almost that only a few percent of the studies were ever designed to show any benefit. So that's a very different statement than saying only 5% or 6% of the studies show benefit. If only 5 or 6% of the studies that were approved were designed to actually look for benefit, then you can see the distorted picture that starts to emerge. And that again is one of these hypocrisies which you have to dig a little deeper to actually see and find. But having said that, when I started to look deeper, when I started to look at data coming out of other countries, when I started to look at non-federally funded lab research, a different picture started to emerge, and I spent a good 18 months really starting to investigate. And there was always the patients as well. And again, frankly, I would dismiss them as basically malingerers who just wanted to get high, and I thought this is, and there is some of that. I mean, I want to be clear, there is still some of that. But what I also came to the conclusion is that there were people who seemed to get real medical benefit. And I was particularly interested in these children who had seizures because, it was so compelling. With an adult who has pain, you still sort of say, well, look, how much of this is really the medication? How much is it maybe is the person even drug seeking? Or how much is it that it's a placebo effect? A kid who's having seizures up to 300 a week, and has tried everything. I mean, you know, they've gone through the ladder of options that the United States medical system had to offer, many, many different drugs. I think they said they went to seventh generation medications. And they were even thinking about compounding veterinary medications for this little girl who was having seizures all the time. They were willing to compound a veterinary medication before considering the possibility of using medicinal marijuana, and specifically CBD oil, a non-psychoactive substance which is not smoked but is actually an oil that you take under the tongue. It was striking to me that we'll try all these other medications, we'll even talk about veterinary medications, but not this. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And this mom, like anything any parent might do, finally, you know, said, if this can possibly work, I'm going to try it. And she got a hold of it, and she had to do everything herself because no pharmacy would compound this for her or turn it into the oil. She had to do it herself in her kitchen, and it worked. It worked. That was Charlotte Figge's story. Now, people may say, hey, look, that's one girl, and, you know, how do you really make science out of that? I agree. But I'll say two things. One is that she is representative of many more people out there. We told Charlotte's story, but we always wanted to make it clear that she was emblematic, not anecdotal. And it's all anecdotal to some extent because these are still stories, but that's why you want to do the research, and that's why you want to have the research easy to do. The fact that someone like her can, you know, she lived in a state where medicinal marijuana was not legal, she couldn't get access to something that very clearly seems to be helping her, is one of the, I think, potentially great tragedies of all this. So, but I found those stories and then the science behind those stories and the science around the world pretty compelling.
So, quick last question. This was obviously an incremental step by the DEA yesterday. What's next? Where does this go from here, and how long does that take?
You know, I think it's very hard to put timelines on this. I mean, there's nothing that would prevent the DEA from considering a rescheduling or a descheduling at some time, you know, in the near future even. So that could happen. And I think with regard to describing this as an incremental victory, again, I just want to make clear that, you know, there's clearly movement, and there's people who are very interested in this topic, who've seen that there's potential benefits here and it should be studied. People within the medical establishment, people within the political establishment, everywhere. Having said all that, I still wouldn't even describe this as incremental. I think in some ways it's a little bit of a just purely symbolic or almost a hide the ball sort of victory. And what I mean is that if you simply say, hey, look, we hear you, we're going to create more of this research-grade marijuana. Okay, we've done that, so we hear you. But it's still Schedule 1, so the access to it is still really challenging. You haven't really changed much. You've basically said we're going to make more of it, but it's going to still be hard to access. So it's a symbolic victory at best. I don't know that I'd even describe it as incremental. And I think, again, if they're serious about allowing this to be researched and studied, it's going to take more than just something like this. It's going to really take an ability of a scientist to say, I can now study this with funding, without tons of bureaucratic hurdles, and without the cultural stigma that surrounds this substance still. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for your questions. Let's talk again soon.